Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Oh, I could be better, but it's been a tough week, but I'm all right overall.
It has, and it's been a pretty eventful week. So there's actually a fair bit to get through on and off the pitch. Unfortunately, on the pitch, not fantastic news, and I suppose off the pitch it isn't much better. But we will start with the on the pitch results, and we did start the weekend with a defeat to Chelsea, unfortunately in the FA Cup. But positives to be taken from it. 2-1 wasn't a smashing. We were in the game. We sort of talked last week on the podcast that if we could sort of keep it close, keep it tight, as well as providing sort of a pretty attractive game of football to try and convince some of the sellout crowd to come back, that would be a pretty good outcome, and that's sort of what eventuated. But what was your take on the game, and how did you see the performance?
I really enjoyed the game, the FA Cup game against Chelsea. I thought even though Chelsea probably had the run of the game for the majority, but I thought we gave a really good account of ourselves. We tried to pressure really hard and really high, and we tried to play a really nice brand of football against a high class opposition. And I like the fact that it didn't quite work out in the first half. We went in the 1-0 down. And then, McCann made a couple of tactical changes at half time, and that seemed to stifle Chelsea a little bit. Particularly, I think he basically made Honeyman man mark Kovacic, and that seemed to really work. We started really strongly. I guess in both halves we had a really strong spell, 5-minute spell to start the game, and then just about on their Chelsea's first attack, they deflected the ball past George Long, which was unfortunate. But I think for the second half, it was about 15 or 20 minutes where we had sustained pressure, creating a lot of good opportunities, and just couldn't quite find the finishing blow. But overall, I thought it was a really good performance. I thought, Long was outstanding, made some amazing saves to keep us in the game where, by all accounts, it probably could have ended up a 4 or 5-1 game.
Yeah, definitely.
And there was a few other, really strong performances. Mostly all round. I thought Mackenzie was great at right back.
He really surprised me because he's one that for a while, probably this season, last season, I've seen him as one of those guys who's on the periphery of the team, but wasn't ever a genuine chance of breaking in. He was just sort of like we've had a kind of a revolving door of those younger fullbacks who kind of come in for a couple of games and then don't really make a mark on the side. And I'd sort of put him in that category. But this game against Chelsea really made me sit up and take notice because he was skinning some of their players and getting through and playing some fantastic football.
Yeah, I think that was the thing. The first half, he sort of just stuck. He seemed to just sort of stick to his guns, and he contained that right side, or the left side of their attack, and did really well at that. And but was composed on the ball, and made his passes and made his tackles, and did really well. Some really great covering defense. But then in the second half, as you sort of mentioned, he started to open up a little bit. Get into the opposition half, get down in the corner, beat a player, get a cross in. Really showed sort of everything that he has to offer. And what better stage in front of a sellout KCOM.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other one for me was Lopez, who he's had a fantastic season. So this wasn't a breakout game by any means. But I guess as you're sort of saying in terms of the quality of the opposition as well, our midfield in general in the first half, like you sort of said before, wasn't fantastic. I think Kovacic really ran the show for them in that first half. But Lopez really was playing almost like a lone hand in that midfield because the amount of times he would take possession of the ball and you'd see a Chelsea player come towards him and you'd think, oh, look, he's going to get muscled off the ball and it's a really dangerous place to lose possession. But his composure and his strength, and he really set us up on quite a few attacking runs. So he was really a standout in my eyes as well in that central midfield role. And then I think when Grosicki came on, because, look, if we're going to talk negatives, I think Wilkes was a really poor choice on the left wing. I don't know if Grosicki potentially wasn't fit enough to start the game, but I think Wilkes probably is still not up to scratch. He's not up to match fitness yet. And so he was really struggling to track back and give Lehigh much defence, which meant that I think it was first Hudson-Odoi and then Willian were really sort of carving us open on that right wing. But when Grosicki came on, and especially after we'd scored the goal, which was quite fortunate to be fair, but we really started creating a lot of opportunities and a lot of counter-attacking opportunities, especially through Grosicki on that side. And so I think, there was a lot of chances, and I think, as you said, I think we played quite well. And I mean, you could say we were unlucky to lose the game given the manner of their goals. You could also say we were lucky that the score was as it was because of long saves. But I just think it was a good performance all around.
Yeah, I think overall,
And then unfortunately we also had a defeat against Huddersfield yesterday morning our time, which does make it 3 losses in a row now in the championship and really sort of dampens any sort of enthusiasm or expectation of a run for the playoffs. It's not over. It's not over till the fat lady sings, as they say, but it is looking increasingly unlikely. And I guess it was just disappointing, the manner of the defeat. I guess going behind but then drawing level, we then had all the momentum going into that second half, and yes, there was that long stoppage with the goalkeeper going down injured. But I did see it pointed out, I think during that stoppage, it was really only the Huddersfield Town coach or manager who kind of gathered his players together and I think McGann just sort of left the players to themselves, and I don't know if that really counted against us because we looked really flat after the restart. Huddersfield Town seemed to regather their impetus, and they went on and scored the winner, which was a really unfortunate one. But how did you see this one, and what do you think of the ramifications of the game, I guess?
I would say overall, I was probably pretty disappointed. I'd say overall, I was probably pretty disappointed with the result, and a bit disappointed with a few performances as well. But there were some positives to take out of the game. But I think overall, now that puts us 3 consecutive losses in the league, and that gap, I think, to the top 6 is 7 or 8 points now. It's pretty damaging, and it's much the same story as what happened last season. We got so close, and then the couple of results that went against us and we fell away. So it's very frustrating to, especially those games like that we said last week, that this is the sort of game you target. You go, this is the game we definitely should be winning, closing that gap, or at least not having it extended, and just disappointing in a couple of ways.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's funny because like looking at the game last week, I probably wouldn't have thought of it as a must-win game, but coming out at the back of it with the loss, it's surprising how season-defining it seems to have become, because there does seem to be, I know the players and the manager are going to say their usual sort of things to the media and really pump the team up and try and get them going for next week, which is a tough game itself. But you look at, and we'll talk in a second about off-field manoeuvres, but you sort of look at the state of play and you just think, look, it does become a bit too far to climb. And it's interesting, as you say, it's happened 2 seasons in a row now, and it sort of makes you wonder whether it's more a mental than capabilities, especially when you look at the fact that early in the season we were knocking off Fulham, Brentford, Forest, getting wins against good opposition. So it's not as if I don't think the quality's lacking. It's just potentially maybe it's legs getting a bit heavy from not getting a rest. I know Jackson basically didn't play the Chelsea game and I think only just came on late in the game yesterday morning. So he's now had a little bit of a rest. Whether that's necessary, he can now take Honeyman's spot and maybe sort of improve that midfield a bit. I've got to say I've been reasonably underwhelmed with Kane so far. I don't think he's hit the ground running as much as I would have hoped. He's not made the sort of impact that you would hope from that sort of signing. He's just, I guess, more of the same of what we've got. And I mean, to be fair, Wilkes I thought was a lot better against Huddersfield than he was against Chelsea, so he was really a positive for me. I guess the worry as well is that Bowler's now reported to be out till April. So you think sort of the depth that we had there is really sort of, we've replaced a couple of players in January, but they're now basically just replacing our injuries rather than adding to the squad. So all in all, it's a bit of a concerning situation.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. I think what you touched on Jackson, on Irvine not getting a lot of game time, I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah.
particularly with how strong, like when he came on, he had a huge impact. He had two or three really good chances. And the same with Eves. I was probably surprised that Eves didn't. Honestly, I'm very underwhelmed with Magennis.
Yep.
He hasn't. I don't really think he's done a lot. He doesn't seem to add a lot in attack. He's got jaggy with a couple of. He got a couple of penalties maybe, and a couple of okay goals. But like Eves came on and his first thing to do was a cracking header, which was a
Yeah.
great save from Grabara. So it was. But I guess these are the decisions that McCann's making. I think that somewhat, I think, is also part of the reason we've sort of fallen away, is that the team, the 11 that we had that was winning all those games, or that won us a lot of games and got us in a really strong position. Now, sure, he's recruited Herbie Kane and he likes Herbie Kane. He's worked with him before, but he's come in and he hasn't really added anything. But he's then had to pulled, say, Jackson Irvine out of the midfield.
Yep.
And we probably are actually a little bit weaker with some of the guys that he's brought in and installed straight into that first team.
Yeah, and I mean, I can sort of appreciate, not so much in Herbie's case, as he's obviously on loan, and I guess Wilkes is as well, although that potentially it looks like it will become a permanent. I can sort of appreciate, yes, okay, they're investing in youth, they're investing in the future, but when you're in a fight for a promotion spot, I look back at our first promotion tilt under Steve Bruce, when we got to January and we were looking really strong, and we actually went out and we added George Boyd as a really capable, experienced winger / attacking midfielder in the division, who added goals just as they were sort of starting to dry up because Aluko was injured and Jay Simpson wasn't doing fantastically well. You need to be adding that sort of experience, and I'm sure in January in the more recent promotion spot push, I'm pretty sure we added Maloney, if I'm not mistaken, and Nick Powell as well, and Diamande arrived as well. Diamande was probably a bit more hit and miss, but it was sort of going for those more experienced additions, more promising additions to actually enhance the squad, rather than the additions that we've made this January so far, and potentially looks like we might be making over the next 24, 48 hours, are more the sorts of things you do in summer when you're looking at building a squad for the season. You're looking to build some, put some youth into the squad and add some enthusiasm, but you also need to sprinkle in a bit of experience as well. And I just don't see where that's coming from now. I think it's great to have such a young, exciting, promising squad, but you do need to have a bit of experience in there as well to kind of pull everyone along and lift them up when they're starting to struggle, and give them some sort of experience that they've gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said about the signings is pretty spot on. When you talk about previous, promotion pushes and promotion chances, I even think of the last time we did get promoted, where we had to end up going through the playoffs, but we were even then we were in a automatic spot for a lot of the season, and then fell away again at a similar time of the season to end up having to go through the playoff spots. So just an interesting trend, I suppose, that's starting to appear, in I guess in our history, in our that we can perform really well for, I guess, 3/4 of the season and get ourselves into a strong position, and then the same sort of time, January, February, we sort of have a bit of a fall away. And I mean, I'm still, I'm probably not as optimistic as I was, a month or two ago about, our chances overall. But I mean, if we can get back on track, like sooner rather than later, because I think the longer we go without a win, obviously the harder it gets, and the more it becomes, you start needing to win 10 out of 10 games, sort of thing. But I think at the moment we can sort of only really still afford to drop 2 or 3 more over the course of the remainder of the season. So it's pretty touch and go as it is. But I'm very mildly optimistic. But the players are definitely pushing me to the edge of patience, so to speak.
Yeah, and just before we move on to the next topic, I will also add, I was actually invited onto a podcast for a Chelsea group over in the UK called At the Bridge. So I think that's being released in the next few days. And basically we talked about the FA Cup game, and I sort of gave my perspective on a couple of Hull players, in particular Jared Bowen, so maybe worth checking out if anyone's interested in that. But We'll move on to probably the most gripping topic of conversation over the last day or so, and that was the news that emerged last night about Kamil Grosicki and his move to West Brom, which has sort of, to an extent, come up out of nowhere. I think for a while McGann's been sort of saying that we were pretty much done in the window. He was happy with what he had. There hadn't been any bids for Jared, and that was that. Sort of, I alluded to it before when we were talking about the how definitive that Huddersfield game now feels in retrospect, because you look at that gap to the top six, and I actually don't at all blame the club for looking at Kamil and saying, you're in the last 6 months of your deal, we're not going to renew your contract because it's a pretty significant wage. Look at what happened with Henriksen. We haven't been able to sell him this window. Clubs coming in basically offering, my understanding is it's basically $1 million plus a little bit more if they get promoted, which is looking reasonably likely, although they're looking a bit shaky lately. So you call it $1 million, 1.5 million maybe for Grosicki, and you say, can you really afford to pass that up? And it was funny, the timing of it all, because I'd actually messaged you guys in our little chat shortly before that to say I was actually coming around to the idea of selling Bowen, because from a very similar sort of way of thinking, being pragmatic, looking at the table, thinking about our chances of making the playoffs, it comes to a point where you say, well, actually, maybe it is a great time to cash in. He's admittedly not in fantastic form. If that carries on for the second half of the season, will his value just drop off a cliff? What can he add to the side for the rest of the season if we are not to make the playoffs? Would it make more sense to cash in on him now, potentially get a new signing in, hitting the ground running, getting up to speed before next season, or giving a Lewis Potter or someone like that game time? I don't know quite if I'd be willing to let both Grosicki and Bowen go in the next couple of days. I think that would probably hit the team a bit too much. But it's a really fascinating situation that we've ended up in, and it's going to be a very interesting couple of final days of the transfer window. So what have you made of the news about Grosicki?
I think this sort of same as you. It sort of came way out of left field, I suppose. I wasn't expecting it. Blindsided a little bit, but as you say, it's hard to sort of knock that back. 12 months ago, or 6 months ago, even probably Henriksen probably should have gone because that hasn't worked out, and I think that they've learned from that, and they're sort of going, okay, well, if we activate Grosicki's 12-month extension, we have to pay that £27,000 a week, and I think Grosicki's much more, marketable than Henriksen. Not, and that's not meant to be a slight against Henriksen. It's just that, as a pacey, exciting, attacking winger, as opposed to a defensive box to box, midfielder sort of thing. It's just how the window works, and often you're chasing those attacking players to help push your fight for promotion or safety or whatever it is. But I think they're wary of making that same mistake again. And as you touched on, it's from a business sense, and unfortunately that is football clubs now, they are a business. So from a business sense, it makes sense to cash in on Grosicki. As you said, and I am with the same sentiment, I would be very concerned if Grosicki goes and then Bowen went as well. I think that would leave us in just about in disarray. The funds would be nice, but right at the end of the window, the end of the January window, when January already has inflated prices, is what are we really going to get? I feel like that 20 million is going to get sort of spent before you know it, and probably not as well as it could. So it might even, if they did go, it might be better just to bring maybe one or two not huge signings in, just consolidate and leave the majority of that to try and source someone decent in the summer. But I don't know, it's a tough one, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the other player who's been linked with a move away, which I think is probably a non-starter, is Device being linked to LA Galaxy. But I think that one, much like Lopez's potential link to an MLS club as well, I don't see as happening anytime soon. We will activate his clause. It won't be for a very high wage. He'll play for another season, if not more. He sounds very happy here, so we'll see what happens with that one. The news about Grosicki did come with also the rumours that Newcastle had put in a pretty substantial bid for Bowen, which I think would have been around about the 20 million plus add-ons. That one was a bit worrying as well, because that was sort of in the ballpark of what we were asking for. But I think there was a mention in the Hull Daily Mail article today that that's been discredited by people close to Bowen and close to the club. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that's true. With the sale of Grosicki, though, there is sort of a need or a desire to look for a replacement, and the two names that have been linked so far, Jordan Jones from Rangers, who I've got to admit I'm not particularly thrilled by, sort of gives off Milinkovic vibes to an extent. He's played 3 games for the season for them, and he's scored no goals, so not a fantastic sort of return for a winger. I don't know if he's been injured or anything like that, but not been out on loan anywhere, so that's a bit of a concern. And the other one who we've sort of been on again, off again linked to, even going back to last summer, was Marcus Maddison from Peterborough. And the interesting one about this, so he's 26, 52 goals in about 200 appearances for them, which, you know, talking about wanting a bit more of an experienced player, he really does sort of fit into that mould. The interesting one about this was that the Peterborough chairman was on, I think it was on Sky Sports News yesterday, saying Maddison was likely to leave the club and he was likely to go to a mid-table championship club about to sell 2 players. And so the positive aspect from that is we can say, hey, that could be us, you know, mid-table championship, Grosicki going, potentially, unfortunately, maybe Bowen going, so that could be us. But then if that's true, and it means that Bowen's going, it's probably not a great outcome. But look, you know, joining the dots, adding 2 and 2 and getting 5, we're sort of saying that maybe that's us. What do you make of the potential links to these players, and are they the sorts of players that you want to be seeing us replacing Grosicki with, and potentially Bowen as well, I guess?
All I will say is I don't really know much about either of those players, to be honest. You know, if we're lucky, maybe one of those 2 players that this mid-table championship club is selling or has sold is Milinkovic, and then Milinkovic and Grosicki adds 2, and we get to keep Bowen and
that was my thought
else
as well. I was like, oh, geez, hopefully it's about Milinkovic, yeah.
Look, to be honest, I don't know a lot. I think if it's Peterborough, then would that be? Has he worked with McCann before? Yeah. So,
which seems to be a theme. I mean, McCann seems to enjoy, and I think the link with who was it, Jones, is because he's Northern Irish. So I think McCann might have even played with him for Northern Ireland. So it seems to be sort of a common theme that he does seem to like going after players that he knows quite well.
Yeah, I mean, I think most managers sort of have that. They've got, maybe not for every player they've ever worked with, but they always seem to have 1 or 2 that they, you know, are happy to have them follow them along if they change clubs. So, I mean, if he is, I mean, for the most part, most of the other guys that McCann's brought with him that have worked with him I've been pretty impressed with. I think Wilkes, we've only seen, you know, a game and a half from him.
Yeah.
There's been flashes of brilliance. I think the only decent thing he did in the Chelsea game, unfortunately, was a really nice cross. You know, but apart from that, didn't do a lot. But I think that was somewhat of the tactics that were employed in the first half. You know, but as you said, a much better performance against Huddersfield. So, you know, there's signs there. I think Tafazoli's been awesome. You know, and so there's some good signs from the guys that have worked with him and that know his style. So, you know, if Maddison is one of those and did happen to join, then I would imagine he'd be hopefully reasonably successful.
Absolutely. So it's going to be a really interesting final couple of days of the window. I'm almost expecting Grosicki to be sold as we're recording this, but nothing so far. But we'll see what happens with that. And we've got a pretty important game this weekend as well. I guess I call it important because every game from this point on is really, I wouldn't say a must win, but certainly this one we've really got to turn around the slump of 3 losses in a row. And it is against Brentford at home, so pretty tough opposition, but we've both got 2 wins in our last 5, so similar sort of form. What do you make of this one? Do you sort of see it as almost a free hit in the sense that we're probably not expected to get much out of it, and therefore maybe to loosen the players up a bit?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think I guess like my only thoughts on this game is that we should basically start with a lineup similar to how we finished Huddersfield. We seem to, I don't know what's happened over the last month where what worked for most of the season is sort of not working now. But once we had McGuinness and Eves on the park together, and we seem to have a lot more impetus going forward, a lot more momentum, and we seem to be developing a lot more attacking play. So, I mean, I would probably just go start with the two up top. You've got Keane Lewis-Potter on the bench to replace one of them if needed. That's probably about as much as I can really offer. I think, sort of as you say, like, and I mentioned before, we're at that point where almost all our games are must-win games if we're still trying to make the playoffs. And I mean, we should, but also realistically, it may be that 8-point gap may be very difficult to overcome in the last part of the season. So I think we just got to go out and do all we can do. And I mean, I'm hopeful that we'll get the result, but it'll be what it'll be.
Yeah, and look, it is unfortunate that we've had a couple of poor injuries at this time of the season with Elder and Device out of the side. It's a curious stat, but it's one that continues, that we still can't win a game without Device in the side. I think that's now 9 games without a win with him missing. So look, fingers crossed he can get back sooner rather than later, because he's such a vital part of that defence. But yeah, same as you. I think, look, it is almost worth just going gung-ho and attack now. Like you said, I think we looked much better when... It's interesting with Bowen. He scored so many goals from the wing that you would think he'd be almost better up top, because he'd be given a clearer sight at goal, more focus put on him. But you see it sometimes with these players. I can think, off the top of my head, like Richarlison at Everton, for instance, where he's a winger as well. But when he gets played up top, he actually kind of falls back in on himself. And I think Bowen's a little bit the same, where he just... whether he's playing in that attacking midfield role or as striker, I just don't think he offers as much as he does out on the wing, because I think he gets that little bit more space. He can cut inside, he can be a bit more tricky, run to the byline, etc. So I think we looked a whole lot better when he actually did get shifted out wide when Eves came on, because I think we almost basically went with a forward 4 at that point. But yeah, look, it's a tough one. I think I agree with you. I think I'd rather see Eves starting the game than McGuinness, but if we were to play both of them, look, I wouldn't be opposed to that either, and see how we go. But just before we finish off, it has been a pretty big episode. We do have a pretty significant football flashback of the week, which coincidentally does come from just about exactly 3 years ago today against Liverpool in the Premier League, where we did run out victors 2-0. A significant game for 2 reasons. A win against Liverpool is always significant in and of itself, but it was our last league sellout at the KCOM, which was a stat I was alerted to when I saw that the Chelsea game was our first sellout since that game. But it was also, funnily enough, Grosicki's debut for Hull, which is pretty incredible when you think that it's been 3 years with him in the side. And it was our 3rd win in a row at home against Liverpool, which I would be pretty confident in saying that there is not a single team in world football at the moment that could boast a similar stat. So all in all, a pretty incredible win. Significant win for Silver at the time, really kind of kept us fighting against relegation. It was a very unique, in a lot of ways, Hull City lineup, because we had guys like Aleb Dalawi and Ranocchia and Ndiaye in that starting 11, who obviously were only with us for the 6 months. But then you also had, Maguire, Robertson, Jakupovic, Huddleston, Evandro, Klukas and Hernandez. So it was a really sort of weird blend of the old, the temporary and the new, with Grosicki there as well, who's still with us. So it's this sort of weird lineup when you look at it, when you've got your Huddleston and your and Hernandez and stuff from that first Bruce spell in the Premier League. Then you got Klukas and stuff from that promotion season out of the Championship, and then the Silver loans, and then Grosicki. So what did you make of that game?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a look back at it earlier, and as you sort of mentioned with the lineup, I sort of was thinking that's probably got to be close to the strongest
Yeah,
lineup we've probably ever fielded, as a club. In the Premier League with guys. I mean, Ranocchia was. I'd never, that was sort of one. The rumor came, and I went, oh wow, that'd be a signing, and didn't really think it was going to come off, and it did, and I thought he was really good for, what would he have played second half of the season? Maybe 12 or 15 games.
yeah.
He was, I thought he was really good for,
Apart from that
you
back
know,
pass against Palace, but other than that,
yeah,
or was it
yeah,
back pass or missed clearance or something? Yeah. Apart
yeah,
from
I would
that, he
say,
was
if it was 15, then 12 of 15 games, I thought he was great.
yeah,
Scored a couple of goals, I think.
yeah.
Did a bit of everything. A great through ball in this game to set up the second goal. um, yeah, but I think it was one of the best lineups we've had in terms of just pedigree, I guess. And nice to see, as you sort of touched on, some of those older those players that not necessarily old, but players that we have fond memories of, guys
Yeah.
like Huddleston and Jakupovic. So yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting game, and looking at the highlights, it was a bit of a, I guess, the typical of what those wins we were pulling at. Then there was a bit of a snatch and grab sort of a game. We the first goal was a bit lucky, a bit of a Mignolet mistake, and they threw plenty at us, and apart from a couple of miscued strikes from Coutinho and some amazing saves from Jakupovic, we were probably lucky to still be 1-0 up for coming for a large portion of that. But then a lovely Ranocchia through ball from just outside for halfway into from our half to set Nias away, and a nice finish to seal it. So I think overall it's a game with fond memories, and sort of, as you mentioned, it had pretty strong repercussions for our form at the time, and put us in a position where we were pretty close to securing safety that season, but sort of we fell away over the last probably half a dozen games of that season.
Yeah, and look, it is interesting. I also watched the highlights today, and it's I guess we've become so accustomed to seeing this Liverpool side under Klopp just sort of sweeping aside everyone. And you look at this game, and I think I heard the stat during the highlights that it was actually their first loss as a club where Mane had started the game, which is pretty remarkable. And it's crazy, like you kind of said, with Coutinho was in the side, Mane, like it was a very similar or very strong lineup, very similar to the lineup that they have now, give or take a couple of additions with Alisson in goal and Salah on the wing and all that sort of thing. But it was a very strong Liverpool side, and to get that sort of win over them at the time under Klopp, so they were really starting to get going under Klopp as well at that point. It was a pretty fantastic win, and yeah, it's strange to think that was Grosicki's debut for us. So obviously a pretty memorable game for him to start with. And if it is to be that he's played his last game for us, his final game against Premier League opposition in Chelsea, he scored a goal. So he's kind of bookended his City career pretty neatly with a pretty decent 3-year spell.
Yeah, I think he's been. He was a bit enigmatic to start, but I think overall he's been, hugely successful, hugely popular. If he does go, then honestly, I wish him, the best in the remainder of his career. If he stays for the next 6 months, then I hope he scores a bunch of goals for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think I've seen a few people on Twitter pretty amazed at the transfer fee being as low as it is. I think, you have to be pragmatic to an extent. He's 31, turning 32 pretty soon. 6 months left on his deal. On a pretty solid wage for the championship. I don't think you can really begrudge the fee a whole lot. I don't think you would have got a whole lot more for him, especially at this point in the window as well. I'm sure West Brom basically just tested the waters, and we sort of blinked first, but it wouldn't have been without a fair bit of negotiation, or at least indication of what it would take to pry him away from the club. If it is to be his final game against Huddersfield, it is what it is. And like you, look, I wish him all the best. I think he's been pretty harshly done by fans of the club at different points. He's always sort of, I guess there's always been the rumours that he was going to leave, and he never did. So he was really, in the end, ended up being quite a loyal player. You look at, he joined us that January, probably with the promise of, let's try and keep the club up. Otherwise, we'll try and sort you out with a move. That didn't eventuate. He's stuck with us. He clearly loves the club, loves the area. His daughter is growing up in Hull, I believe, and so he seems quite happy here. He did talk about trying to sign a new deal. Clearly couldn't kind of come to an agreement on wages and length of the deal, perhaps. But yeah, can't begrudge him at all, and I think he's been fantastic for the club. And I think, a couple of weeks ago, it might have been with Mitch, it might have been with yourself as well, when we sort of looked at who the top 5 Hull City scorers were for the 2010s. It's pretty amazing when you consider that he's in that top 5 when he's just ticked over or hasn't even quite ticked over 3 years at the club. So you can't argue with the impact that he's made here, and yeah, absolutely all the best to him going forward. But thank you for joining me, Dan.
No worries.
And hopefully we can bounce back to get a decent win against Brentford this coming weekend. And fingers crossed we don't end up with too many players out the door in the next couple of days. Just as a reminder as well, the game against Brentford is actually the early game, so it will be televised here in Australia. So it'll be available on beIN Sports and KO and all those good places. So hopefully everyone's up cheering on City to a great win this weekend. And until next time, come on City.
You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
Going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.